At first, there was no point to it. There were events, moments, fragments that did not yet belong together. But fear does not tolerate fragmentation for long. Slowly, connections are drawn, similarities are noticed, and absences begin to feel intentional. This is the moment when fear stops asking what and starts asking who. Once connections are suggested, they become difficult to unsee. Details that once felt incidental begin to align. Timing is reconsidered. Location gains significance. What had been isolated now feels deliberate. Fear sharpens perception, but it also narrows it. Alternatively, explanations fade. Complexity feels less useful. The question shifts again. Not who could this be, but what kind of person could do this? I'm Jenny. I love history and I'm fascinated by the moments where human psychology collides with it in the worst possible ways. In this series, I explore crime through context rather than spectacle, asking not just what happened, but what kind of world made it possible. This episode is about recognition, about how fear begins to crystallise, when patterns replace uncertainty, and when a series of events begins to feel as though it belongs to someone. The idea of a singular presence is unsettling, but it is also comforting. A figure implies intention. Intention implies limits. If there is one person, then there is something that can be pursued, understood, stopped. Fear prefers this shape. Language begins to change. Stories are no longer framed as isolated incidents. They are spoken about together. A pattern is assumed. And once a pattern is assumed, it demands a name. The name does not arrive as a solution. It arrives as a tool, a way to speak about fear without describing it every time. In Whitechapel, that name would become very familiar very quickly. Not because it explained anything, but because it simplified everything. At first, the name is tentative. It appears in passing, in conversation, in print. Not as a declaration, but as a convenience. A way to refer to something that has begun to feel singular. Jack the Ripper. The name does not describe a person. It describes a fear. It offers a shorthand, a way to hold multiple events inside a single phrase. Once spoken, the name spreads quickly. It is repeated because repetition gives it weight. Because saying it suggests understanding, and because naming something feels like the first step towards controlling it. But a name does more than organise fear. It reshapes it. Attention shifts, questions change. Instead of asking, why this place, people begin to ask who this man is. Instead of examining conditions, they examine character. The figure grows sharper as the context softens. Complex systems fade into the background. Responsibility narrows. Fear feels more contained. But it is also redirected. Once a name exists, it begins to gather meaning. Not all at once, but gradually. Descriptions attach themselves to it. Motives are suggested. Intent is assumed. The figure becomes easier to imagine than the conditions that allowed him to operate. A name invites narrative. It encourages speculation. It rewards certainty. Over time, the figure feels more real than the streets, the systems, and the silences that came before him. This is not because the figure was more important. It is because he is simpler. A person can be imagined, a system must be understood. And understanding takes effort. As the name settles, attention follows it. The focus tightens and the story narrows. What began as a way to organise fear becomes a way to contain responsibility. The city is no longer examined as a whole. The spotlight fixes on a single figure. This shift feels productive. It feels like progress. But it comes with a cost. When fear is personified, context recedes. The conditions that shaped vulnerability become background noise. The figure absorbs attention that once belonged to lives, to places, and to systems. This episode was never really about a name. It was about what naming allows us to stop seeing, how fear becomes easier to carry when it can be imagined as a person, and how that person can eclipse the world that made him possible. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but it does show us what we choose to focus on and what we quietly let fade. Thank you for listening. Until next time, take care and be gentle with what history leaves behind.